What happens when one man stands against a throne, against a nation, against the gods that everyone else has learned to fear, and says that none of them are real? What happens when the sky is shut, when the rivers shrink, when the fields crack open under the sun, and the people realize that the idols they trusted cannot send even a single drop of rain? This is the story of Elijah, the prophet of fire, the prophet of drought, the prophet of the whisper. And before this story is over, heaven will answer, a mountain will tremble, a widow will watch her dead son breathe again, a king will be judged, and a weary man of God will discover that the Lord is not only found in power, but in silence. In those days, the northern kingdom of Israel was ruled by King Ahab, son of Omri, a powerful dynasty seated in Samaria, a kingdom tied to foreign alliances, military ambition, and deep spiritual compromise. Ahab's marriage to Jezebel, daughter of the Phoenician royal house, opened the gates for the worship of Baal to rise in the land, not quietly, not privately, but in the center of royal power itself. In that world, religion and kingship were deeply intertwined, and Phoenician royal religion carried real political force. The people rose in the morning to grind grain on stone querns, to bake flatbread over heated clay, to carry water jars from springs, to tend goats on the hills and prune olive trees on narrow terraces, and yet over all of it hung a spiritual question that would define an age. Who truly rules the heavens? The Lord of Israel, or Baal, the storm god worshipped across the Phoenician coast. Phoenician religion was embedded in daily life, temple ritual, and royal identity, which helps explain why this conflict would become so fierce under Jezebel's influence. Then, without warning, Elijah appeared. He did not arrive with armies, or court credentials, or wealth. He stepped out of the wilderness with the authority of a man who had already stood somewhere greater than the throne room of Israel. And before Ahab, Elijah declared that there would be neither dew nor rain except at the word of the Lord. It was a judgment aimed directly at the lie of Baal worship, because if Baal truly ruled storm and fertility, then let Baal answer the drought. After speaking judgment, Elijah disappeared into hiding by the brook Cherith. There, in a lonely ravine cut between rock and scrub, the prophet lived far from applause, far from crowds, far from every visible sign of success. Ravens brought him bread and meat, morning and evening, and water ran below him through the stones. The same God who commanded the sky also watched over one hidden servant in one forgotten place. But drought is merciless, and even the brook dried up. Then God sent Elijah north, not to a rich household, not to a loyal Israelite noble, but to a widow in Zarephath, in the region tied to Phoenicia itself. There at the gate of the town, amid dust, hunger, and the smell of dry earth, Elijah found a woman gathering 2 sticks for what she believed would be the last meal she and her son would ever eat. She had only a handful of flour, and a little oil, and then she expected death. Elijah told her not to fear, and asked her to trust the word of the Lord before she could see the outcome. And in that smoke-darkened house, where the walls were mud brick over stone foundations and storage jars stood against the wall, the miracle began, not with thunder, but with enough. Enough flour. Enough oil. Enough for one more day, and then one more, and then one more. Then the story turned again. The widow's son grew sick, weaker, quieter, until the room fell still. In an age without physicians who could reverse such a moment, in a small house already marked by grief and hunger, death entered and sat down heavily. Elijah carried the child upstairs, stretched himself over him, and cried out to the Lord. Then life returned. Breath came back into the boy. A mother who had prepared for burial received her son alive again. And in that upper room, the truth became undeniable. The word of the Lord in Elijah's mouth was true. Years passed, and the land remained under judgment. The rivers shrank. Livestock weakened. Crops failed. Dust settled over vineyards and fields. Men searched valleys for grass. Women rationed grain and oil. Children grew up under a sky that would not break. In a land where Baal was honored as a power over storm and fertility, every empty cloud became its own verdict. Then the word of the Lord came again. Elijah was to show himself to Ahab. When the king saw him, he called him the troubler of Israel. But Elijah turned the accusation back where it belonged, on the throne, on the royal house, on the abandonment of the commandments of the Lord, and on the worship of the Baals. Then he summoned the nation to Mount Carmel. There on Carmel, Elijah placed the crisis into one unforgettable question. How long would the people go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord was God, they were to follow him, and if Baal was God, then let them follow Baal. It was not a debate about private preference. It was a demand for decision. The test was simple: 2 altars, 2 sacrifices, no human fire. The prophets of Baal began first. Morning became noon, noon bent toward afternoon, and the mountain echoed with cries that went nowhere. They called, they danced, they pleaded, they slashed themselves in ritual frenzy, but no fire came. No voice answered. No God moved. The biblical account presents the silence as total, devastating, public. Then Elijah repaired the altar of the Lord with 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel, as if to remind the divided people who they once were. He laid the wood in order, prepared the sacrifice, and then drenched it all with water until the trench overflowed. It was the opposite of stagecraft. No hidden spark could survive that soaking. Then Elijah prayed, briefly, clearly, without frenzy, asking that the people might know that the Lord alone is God and that their hearts might be turned back. Then heaven answered. Fire fell, sudden, violent, undeniable. It consumed the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, even the water in the trench. And the people fell on their faces crying that the Lord, He is God. That moment did not merely win a contest. It exposed a lie that had gripped a nation. The God of spectacle had answered with silence, and the God of Israel had answered with holy fire. And after the fire, Elijah bowed low to pray for rain. He sent his servant to look toward the sea, once, twice, again and again, until at last a tiny cloud appeared, small as a man's hand. Then the sky darkened. Wind rose over Carmel. Thunder rolled. Rain crashed onto the earth in sheets. Dust became mud. Parched ground drank deeply. The long judgment broke open into mercy. But even after Carmel, Elijah was still a man. Jezebel heard what had happened, and sent a death threat. The prophet who had stood before the nation now ran into the wilderness, collapsing beneath a broom tree. There, exhausted beyond words, Elijah told the Lord that it was enough. This is one of the most human moments in Scripture, a reminder that even after great victory, fear and fatigue can still rush in like floodwater. And God did not shame Elijah there. He fed him. He let him sleep. He woke him gently. He gave him bread, water, and strength for the journey ahead. Then Elijah traveled to Horeb, the mountain of God, where he hid in a cave and poured out his loneliness. He believed he was the only one left. He believed the battle had consumed everything. But on that mountain, Elijah learned something deeper than Carmel. A great wind passed by, but the Lord was not in the wind. An earthquake shook the mountain, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. A fire blazed, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a low whisper, a still small voice. And that may be the surprise at the center of Elijah's story. The prophet of fire was also the prophet of the whisper. The God who answers publicly on the mountain also restores privately in the cave. The God who judges nations also cares for one exhausted servant, one widow, one child, one broken heart. Elijah would go on to confront royal injustice again in the matter of Naboth's vineyard, because the God of Israel was not only concerned with altars, but with truth, justice, and the abuse of power. Elijah's ministry stood against both idolatry and moral corruption, refusing to separate worship from righteousness. Then came Elijah's final journey. He walked with Elisha from place to place, crossing familiar roads and sacred memory, until they came to the Jordan. There Elijah struck the waters with his mantle, and the river parted. Then, suddenly, the separation came in fire and whirlwind. Elijah was taken up, not into legend, but into one of the most unforgettable departures in all biblical history. His mantle fell, and his mission continued through Elisha. So why does Elijah still speak across centuries? Because this story is not only about ancient Israel, it is about every generation that is tempted to divide its heart. It is about every soul that wants the comfort of faith without the cost of surrender. Every culture that prefers useful idols to the living God. Every weary believer who has stood bravely in public, and then broken quietly in private. And Elijah's question still stands over us like thunder over Carmel. How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If he is truth, trust him. If he speaks, obey him. And if you are in a season of drought right now, if your prayers feel unanswered, if your strength feels gone, remember Elijah, because the same God who sent bread to the brook, multiplied oil in a widow's house, sent fire to the altar, and whispered hope into a cave, is still the same God today. So now the question is not whether Elijah chose the Lord. The question is whether you will. And if this story stirred something in your spirit, then like this video, subscribe and write this in the comments. The Lord. He is God. And if you have been living through your own wilderness, stay faithful, because sometimes God reveals his greatest power, not in the moment that shakes the mountain, but in the whisper that keeps you steady.